You think you know the Wild West? Think again. This wasn't a land of noble cowboys and wide-open horizons. It was a seething cauldron of chaos. A brutal playground for the desperate and the damned. The Wild West wasn't just a stage for heroes. It was a theater of greed, deception, and raw survival. The romantic myths are just smoke and mirrors to cover the stink of desperation. Let's crack open the case file on the Wild West and expose its festering underbelly. Look past the sepia tones and jangling spurs. The Wild West wasn't about freedom. It was about exploitation. Gold and land were the dirty currency. Everyone was a player in a ruthless game. Settlers, outlaws, and lawmen, they all danced to the same sinister tune. The mythmakers want you to believe it was about pioneering spirit. In truth, it was a desperate scramble for survival, fueled by greed and cloaked in gun smoke. Let's talk about the players. The settlers, chasing dreams and fortunes. The outlaws, driven by desperation and lawlessness. And the lawmen, often just a shade less corrupt than the criminals they hunted. Everyone had a price. Everyone gambled with their lives. Cattle rustlers and train robbers didn't become legends because of daring escapades. They became legends because they mirrored the greed of an entire society. The Wild West was a battlefield for the soul. The real enemy was internal. Blind ambition and frantic fear were the saboteurs, whispering poison into the ears of men and women. That fear wasn't just of the unknown, it was of being left behind. It drove settlers to seize land at any cost, trampling over anyone in the way. It pushed outlaws to risk everything in a bid for one last score. And lawmen? They bent the rules to keep a fragile grip on order. The Wild West wasn't conquered by heroes. It was subdued by those who knew how to play the game. So, here we are, peeling back the layers of the Wild West. The sanitized public myth is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies the desperate reality. A land where survival meant breaking the rules and morality was a luxury few could afford. The Wild West was a gamble where the stakes were life and death. Every dusty street and saloon held secrets that could turn a man into a legend or a corpse. This was the real Wild West, where every handshake could be a deal with the devil, and every glance over the shoulder could be your last. Ready to dive deeper? Gold. The siren's call that lured thousands into the jaws of the Wild West. Picture it, a landscape not of promise but of peril. The gold rush didn't just uncover precious metal, it unearthed the darkest corners of human nature. The myth? A land of opportunity. The reality? A lawless frenzy where men traded their souls for a chance to strike it rich. Greed was the master, and it had everyone on a leash. Enter the players. The 49ers, driven by dreams of wealth. The merchants, who saw dollar signs in every pen full of dirt. And the swindlers, lurking in the shadows, ready to fleece the unwary. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie, but few realized the pie was poisoned. The gold rush wasn't about discovery. It was about exploitation. Men labored under brutal conditions, their lives hanging by a thread. The real gold? It lined the pockets of those who sold the shovels and the dreams. Blind greed steered the ship. A fever that clouded judgment and fueled chaos. Men left their families, their lives, and sometimes their sanity behind. They saw gold in every shadow and opportunity in every fool who crossed their path. This was survival of the fittest, where only the cunning and ruthless thrived. It wasn't about striking it rich. It was about staying alive long enough to do so. In this cutthroat arena, morality was a fairy tale. The point of no return? It hit when the gold fields ran dry. Hope turned to dust, and the dreamers became drifters. This was the breaking point, when the glittering promise crumbled, and the ugly truth stood bare. Those who stayed scrounged for scraps, while others moved on, leaving behind ghost towns and shattered lives. The gold rush didn't end with a bang, but with a whimper, a slow, painful surrender to reality. The West was never truly won, just temporarily tamed. The gold rush was a dark chapter, painted over with tales of adventure. But those who lived it knew the truth. The fatal error? Believing that wealth could be snatched without consequence. It's a lesson in human folly, how greed blinds and ambition consumes. In your own life, remember this: easy riches often cost more than they're worth. When you chase gold, make sure you're not selling your soul for a fool's prize. The Wild West teaches us that not all that glitters is worth the gamble. Keep your wits sharp and your heart steady. The next mirage could be your last. Railroads, steel veins pumping life into the West. But don't let the romantic chug of the locomotive fool you. Laying those tracks was a brutal, bloody business. The myth? A symbol of progress and unity. The reality? A ruthless exploitation machine, powered by sweat, blood, and broken promises. Behind every mile of track lies a story of greed and sacrifice, a testament to human tenacity and treachery. Enter the players, railroad tycoons, the undisputed kings of the Iron Road. Workers, expendable cogs in a relentless engine. And the indigenous tribes, whose lands were trespassed and torn apart. The tycoons didn't build an empire, they carved it out with cold precision. Promises of prosperity cloaked the harsh reality. Small towns swallowed by the rail's voracious appetite, workers crushed under its relentless advance. The railroads were a gold mine for the few, a graveyard for the many. Greed was the conductor, driving this iron beast across the continent. Contracts were inked with deception, and corners were cut at the expense of safety and lives. Workers slaved in brutal conditions, their sweat lubricating the gears of progress. Meanwhile, the tycoons lined their pockets, their fortunes built on the backs of the damned. The railroads weren't just tracks. They were a trail of broken dreams and shattered bodies. The point of no return arrived when the railroads collided with the indigenous way of life. Treaties were nothing but paper shields against the iron spear of progress. As the railroads cut through sacred lands, the tribes faced an existential threat. This wasn't just a clash of cultures, it was an annihilation. The railroad's relentless march signaled the turning point, a loss that could never be undone. The tracks may have connected the country, but they severed the spirit of a people. So, what's the takeaway from this ironclad saga of ambition and atrocity? The fatal error was believing that progress justifies any cost. The railroads remind us that unchecked ambition can lay waste to lives and legacies. As you navigate your own tracks in life, remember that true progress requires balance and respect for what came before. Don't let ambition blind you to the human cost of your pursuits. The Wild West railroads weren't just about reaching new horizons, they were about the price paid to get there. Keep your eyes on the tracks, and remember, every step forward should not be over others' ruin. Lawmen of the Wild West, icons draped in legend. But peel back the layers and what do you find? Not paragons of justice, but puppets in a deadly dance. The myth? That of noble sheriffs standing firm against chaos. The reality? A delicate balance of power, often tipping into corruption and brutality. It wasn't about law and order, it was about survival and control. Justice was a commodity, bought and sold like any other. Meet the players, sheriffs, deputies, and marshals, figures wrapped in the thin veneer of authority. Bounty hunters, the loose cannons of justice, driven by reward rather than righteousness. And the outlaws, ever the opportunistic predators. The lawmen weren't just fighting crime, they were playing a high-stakes game of chess. Each move calculated, each alliance tenuous. The lines between right and wrong blurred until they vanished completely. Fear was the invisible deputy, guiding every decision. Lawmen walked a tightrope, balancing justice with the demands of a restless populace and the whims of power-hungry elites. Bribes and backdoor deals were standard fare, and the badge was often just a mask. The so-called protectors of peace sometimes became the very threat they were sworn to combat. The Wild West was a theater where justice played second fiddle to survival. The point of no return? It came when the outlaws learned to play the same game. They turned the tables, exploiting the system's weaknesses. They became folk heroes, their lawlessness romanticized while lawmen struggled to maintain order. This was the tipping point where the scales of justice toppled. The West wasn't tamed by the law. It was outpaced by those who knew how to manipulate it. The badge lost its luster, and with it, authority crumbled. The Wild West's tale of law and order is one of shadow and smoke. The fatal error? Believing that justice is an absolute. In truth, it's a fragile construct, easily bent to the will of those with power and ambition. As you navigate your own world, remember this: justice demands vigilance and integrity. Don't let the allure of power blind you to the truth. The Wild West teaches us that authority without accountability is just another form of tyranny. Wear your badge with honor, whatever form it takes, and remember that real justice serves the people, not the other way around. The Cattle Kingdom, romanticized as the land of cowboys and open ranges. But under the surface, it was a ruthless empire built on exploitation and blood. The myth? A pastoral paradise of cowpokes riding the range. The reality? A brutal battleground for land, power, and survival. The cattle barons ruled with iron fists, and the cost of their dominion was far more than dollars or cents. It was paid in sweat, tears, and livelihoods. Welcome to the stage, the cattle barons, those who controlled the lifeblood of the West. Cowboys, the foot soldiers in this war of attrition. And the homesteaders, caught in the crossfire, fighting for scraps of land. The barons didn't just manage cattle, they managed empires. They wielded power with ruthless efficiency, squeezing every drop of profit from the land and the people. The West was their chessboard, and everyone else was just a pawn. Greed was the ranch hand, driving the expansion at any cost. It fueled land grabs and range wars, each more vicious than the last. The Homestead Act promised land for the taking, but it was a fool's promise. Homesteaders found themselves up against barons whose reach extended beyond the law. The cowboys, often romanticized as free spirits, were little more than serfs, bound by necessity to the whims of the barons. The Cattle Kingdom was a mirage, hiding a wasteland of broken dreams. The point of no return emerged with the relentless expansion and ensuing range wars. Barbed wire, that twisted metal villain, cut across the landscape, dividing land and lives. The open range vanished, and with it, the cowboys' freedom. The era of the Cattle Kingdom gasped its last breath as the barons' power waned. The West transformed, but the scars remained, a testament to greed's destructive power. The land healed slowly, but the echoes of conflict lingered long after the cattle drive ceased. The Cattle Kingdom's legacy is one of unchecked ambition and shattered lives. The fatal error? Ignoring the human cost of empire building. As you ride your own trails, heed this lesson: true power lies not in domination, but in stewardship. Don't let ambition trample over empathy. The Wild West cattle empires show us that unchecked expansion leads not to prosperity, but to ruin. Be wary of the ground you claim, and remember, the land will outlast us all. Nurture it, and it will nurture you. Disregard it, and it will swallow you whole. The West isn't just a place, it's a warning. The Wild West's most insidious player? Not the gunslingers or the barons, but the storytellers. The mythmakers wielded their pens like weapons, crafting tales that turned terror into triumph. The myth? Gallant heroes and breathtaking adventures. The reality? A convoluted web of exaggeration and deceit, designed to sell papers and fuel fantasies. These dime novels didn't just entertain. They rewrote history, distorting the truth until the lie became the legend. The players, publishers, who saw gold in ink and paper. Writers who spun yarns from the flimsiest threads of truth. And the readers, hungry for adventure and escape. These tales weren't just stories. They were propaganda, painting the Wild West as a land of endless opportunity and heroism. Writers turned outlaws into legends, and everyday cowboys into larger-than-life figures. They weren't documenting history. They were inventing it, word by lucrative word. Ego drove the pen. Writers fed their own fantasies while feeding the public's appetite for the exotic and the wild. The truth was a casualty in this literary gold rush. Facts twisted into fiction, creating a narrative that justified the brutality and lawlessness of the West. The dime novels didn't just entertain, they manipulated public perception, romanticizing a world where violence was king and reality was an afterthought. The point of no return came when these stories seeped into the national consciousness, shaping identities and ambitions. Young men ventured west, fueled by dreams spun from these tales, only to find a land far harsher and less forgiving than the pages promised. The dime novels etched a fantasy into the American psyche that persists even now. The Wild West was a product of its own mythology, a self-perpetuating cycle of fiction and reality. The legacy of the dime novels is a cautionary tale about the power of narrative. The fatal error? Consuming stories without questioning their roots. As you navigate today's world of information overload, remember this: always question the source. Don't let sensationalism warp your understanding of reality. The Wild West teaches us that stories have the power to shape worlds and that truth is often the first victim of a good tale. Be the author of your own story, and choose your narratives wisely. The pen, after all, is mightier than the sword, and its wounds are far more insidious. Ghost towns. The haunting remnants of the Wild West's spectacular rise and inevitable fall. The myth? Quaint relics of a bygone era, silent testaments to the indomitable spirit of pioneers. The reality? These hollow shells tell a darker tale of ambition turned to ashes, dreams crushed under the weight of greed and hubris. They weren't abandoned, they were casualties of the relentless push for more. Let's introduce the players, the entrepreneurs, who flocked to boomtowns in search of fortune. The settlers, lured by promises of prosperity. And the speculators, vultures circling for opportunity. When the resources dried up, so did the population. What remained were the ghostly echoes of a once bustling life, a stark reminder of the transient nature of fortune. These towns are graves, marking where ambition overreached and left nothing but dust in its wake. Greed was the architect of these ghostly remains. Boomtowns sprang up overnight, fueled by the frenzy for gold, silver, or oil. But as fast as fortunes were made, they were lost. Infrastructure crumbled as resources dwindled. The promise of wealth turned into a mirage, leaving behind only the skeletons of ill-conceived dreams. What was once a beacon of hope became a monument to hubris. The point of no return was the moment the wells ran dry, the veins of precious metal depleted. The lifeblood of these towns ceased, and with it, the will to stay. People fled, leaving behind possessions, memories, and a legacy of failure. The ghost towns became eerie reminders of a time when the West was wild, and the gamble for greatness ended in abandonment. They are silent witnesses to the destructive cycle of boom and bust that defined an era. The ghost towns of the Wild West offer a stark lesson: the danger of unchecked ambition. The fatal error? Believing that more is always better. In your own pursuits, remember that growth without sustainability is a recipe for disaster. The Wild West ghost towns teach us that true success requires foresight and balance, not just bold action. As you forge your path, ensure your foundations are solid, or risk being haunted by the ghosts of your own making. The echoes of the past are loudest in the silence of failure. Listen well, and let them guide you away from the same fate.